You ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Today is Sunday, October 25th, 2015, and this is episode 137 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, Jerry. How are you, sir?
I am so good it hurts.
I heard, though, you have a leaky lawn.
There's a leak somewhere under there. I'm afraid of what I'm going to find when they dig it up, but we'll see.
That sounds expensive. It could be you finally will get validation that your house is built on an Indian burial ground, I think is what will really happen.
That's true. It would explain where all the water's going.
And the tree attacking you from time to time.
We don't really talk about that in public.
I know. I'm sorry. Anyway.
Anyhow.
So.
Yeah. Just 2 short months, 2 short shopping months until Christmas, friends. So, just,
it's true.
60-day warning. Before we get started, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employer. There's a couple things I wanted to start off with. I finally got through, I believe, most or all of my email backlog, and I had a couple of things I wanted to mention based on that. The first one comes from Lance, and Lance is talking about a topic we had a couple of shows back about spear phishing and email spoofing, and he pointed out that it's a pretty simple task these days and something that should really be done for most people or most organizations to not allow inbound email that appears to come from your domain, come from outside your network. And so you should be looking for the envelope sender and the from address to match your domain and not accept that from outside this. I would hope most organizations are doing that, but if you're not, there you go. That's something to look for.
Yeah, I would wager a lot aren't. I've also heard folks talk about adding an external, like the word external, to the subject line of things that come in from the outside. It's a good idea. I can hear the executives already saying, wait a minute, what if that breaks a critical email that comes in? Right, so there's always that balance you got to
What about my mail rules? Won't you think of my mail rules?
And certainly it doesn't stop every incident of phishing or there's a lot of phishing that is not necessarily pretending to be an internal user. They might be an external user or, posing as some sort of vendor.
Yeah, I think that's becoming more and more the case. Is I think one of the most recent ones we talked about, it was a purported reporter, right? I think that was the Bitcoin BitPay, I believe. It was a reporter who had emailed the CFO, and an alleged reporter. So yeah, but this is kind of a very simple thing that you should probably be doing anyway. So there you go. The other email we got came from Matt, and Matt pointed out in response to some of our cyber insurance discussions that in the UK, and I was not aware of this. This was really interesting to me. In the UK, there's a government-sponsored program related to cyber insurance, and so organizations can engage an assessor, some kind of a qualified assessor, who takes the organization through what Matt described as a lightweight ISO 27000 review, and assuming you pass, you actually qualify for a £25,000 insurance policy. And then I read the link to, I think it was AIG's website. You can get additional coverage at your own cost, but that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I was completely unaware of that as well.
So.
And don't know. I mean, it's kind of, I'm never necessarily a huge fan of a centralized government-run program, but it could be, I would not be surprised if we saw some interesting sort of similar things proposed in the U.S. in the near future.
Yeah, it's not a, number one, it's not a ton of coverage, right? It's 25,000 pounds, so it's probably
Right.
like $40,000 or $50,000 at most. So it's not a huge amount of coverage. It probably doesn't cost all that much, but I think I can imagine that it is an incentive, right? That
Yeah, I wonder if it's like a BBB rating, like it's a vote of confidence for an
Exactly.
organization.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Because, realistically speaking, it takes a lot of time and energy if you're not already doing it natively, to prepare for an audit like that and to meet the audit requirements. So for $40,000 US, that's probably not worth the effort unless you're already there natively or there's some other sort of trickle-down effects of having that coverage.
yeah, exactly right. I think, said another way, it's probably not the thing that's going to incent you to spend lots and lots of money on a security program if you're not already spending it. So, but it may incent you to close some holes that you may not otherwise. So,
So what you're saying is your mom should really take that certification
oh
now.
my God! Somehow I knew you were going to go there.
Many people go there.
Jesus. Moving on. So our first story for tonight comes from actually this podcast. We're actually looking for a new co-host. Oh. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. Our first story comes from the ErrataSec blog. Rob Graham wrote this, I think it was last Friday, and the title is Dumb, Dumber, and Cybersecurity. And it's a very short but pretty, I thought, humorous article. And he points out that there is this 10 Steps to Protect Yourself article on BizJournals, which apparently came from Microsoft. And it's kind of the normal security InfoSec platitude type top 10 things you'll see.
But focused at business, not individuals, right?
Correct. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. It's things like, identify your data and protect your workstations. And, it's things like that with really no depth. And then he goes on to point out that, if you go at the bottom of that article, there is a link to a survey, like I think it's called the Cybersecurity IQ Quiz. And Rob kind of rails on the fact that they point out that you shouldn't be. They say that you shouldn't share your passwords with anybody, but in fact, that's really not valid advice because courts have found over and over again that you, as an employee, are obligated to provide your passwords to your management.
For your corporate assets.
For your corporate assets, that's right.
There was a lot of controversy about, hey, if you're an employee, provide your Facebook password, that sort of thing. And we're not saying you should do that.
No, not that. That's right. But this is very business centric, right? So, but I think the point is that not necessarily around the quiz, but around the top 10 steps that it's these kinds of high level platitude like flybys that are contributing in major ways to the continued bad security practices, rather than focusing on the actual problems, like, as Rob points out, phishing and password sharing and the OWASP, SQLI,
Top 10.
right?
Yeah. OWASP top 10.
Couldn't think of the word OWASP.
That's okay.
Damn, getting old. So
It's true. It's true. Well, I noticed that you're limping just a little more every time you walk into the studio.
yeah.
We'll get your InfoSec walker soon.
I'll have one of those automatic wheelchairs soon. Anyhow, I guess again, point being that organizations really ought to be focusing on things that matter and not things that vendors are wanting to help you with, like Microsoft.
Well, and this is something we've said over and over on this show, and because it bears repeating over and over that the vendors who are trying to sell you something define the problem in terms of their marketing and their education, their outreach, as the problem they can solve, not necessarily the problem that you have. And we have to do a better job of getting better neutral, non-biased, fact-based education about what's really causing problems for our organizations and what they really should be doing to solve them. And then that should feed into finding technical controls or procedure controls or people controls or whatever it is that you want to do to apply. Not, hey, every InfoSec vendor slide deck has to start by defining the problem, which I swear to anyone you hold holy, if I have to sit through one more of those of a vendor trying to tell me about the problem after I've been doing this for 20 years, I may start kicking them out of my office.
Yeah. That you hit on it too, that unfortunately, I think a lot of organizations, especially the bigger ones, have taken this tact of relying heavily on vendors to provide education to their employees. And so it's like it's a vicious circle.
But like anything, if it's free, it means you're the product.
Well, that's exactly right. And
so they start controlling the narrative. And I don't know that people even realize this is happening until we're deep into it. And so you could say, well, what about Gartner? What about SANS? What about some of these? Well, they're not bad places to look. But again, how does Gartner make their money?
Right.
So, to be honest with you, I not that it's the perfect answer, but something like the Verizon data breach report, I think, is one of the better sources of information to really get a non-biased view of what's going on. Sure, Verizon has their own agenda for putting that out, but all things being equal, something like that, I think, is a much better way to say, okay, these are the real problems as they exist right now. How do we solve them?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and by the way, Rob Graham is a very entertaining writer. He pisses people off a lot. He trolls and has fun with trolling, but he's incredibly sharp. I would say he's a friend of the show more that we're friends of his. He probably thinks we're little peons that bother him, but yep. He is worth following. He has a very insightful and different view of things that I think is worth considering.
Yep, agreed. So let's move on to our next story, which comes from Business Insider. The title is TalkTalk didn't use basic security that could have protected its 4 million customers' details.
For shame.
Can you believe this? So the story here is that TalkTalk, who announced that they were breached this past week.
By the way, for those who don't know, because I actually didn't, TalkTalk is a UK-based broadband provider.
Yeah,
they're So there you go. Just little,
kind of like a little mini Comcast, apparently.
Apparently, but less evil, maybe.
I don't know
either. But anyway, for just because Jerry doesn't like to give background and just assumes everybody knows what he knows, TalkTalk UK broadband provider. Continue on.
That's why I keep you here. Sometimes. Until you start to get lippy.
Well, what can I say?
All right. So anyhow, thank you very much for that background. TalkTalk did get breached. Apparently, by the way, this is the third or fourth time in the past year. So
you're just going to edit it out of the show anyway.
They're going to. They've got to be pretty used to this by now, right?
Well, their incident response handbooks could probably get a little more refined. I
would hope so. So anyway, the article here points out that, in fact, apparently their data was not encrypted, and that's a really terrible thing because without the data being encrypted, it was susceptible to being stolen, and wow, they really dropped the ball. And by the way, so that kind of. Well, you go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, this is something we hear over and over again on all these breaches. What was encrypted, what wasn't encrypted.
Right.
It is a common refrain we're hearing whenever these breaches come up.
Yeah, exactly. And so that actually dovetails into the next article we have, which actually is from the Graham Cluley blog, and it is titled "TalkTalk was hacked, but it's silly to ask if the data was encrypted." And this article goes on to point out that it's actually kind of trivial, nonsensical, unimportant, irrelevant, whatever, that the data wasn't encrypted because given the way in which it was stolen, which apparently was through SQLI, that encryption really wouldn't have mattered. The way most organizations would encrypt data like this is using whole disk encryption, which is great. As they point out, if your data is on a laptop that you leave in a train, or you're worried about someone smashing through your data center wall, running in and grabbing hard drives and running away with your data, that is awesome. However, if you're just using whole disk encryption and on a booted system, the system's going to just happily give unencrypted data to whoever. And I think they point out that even more than that, even more sophisticated levels of encryption are probably still going to be susceptible. So, if your web app is vulnerable to SQLI, and even if you're using field level encryption, but your web app is authorized to be able to retrieve the data, it's going to happily give whoever unencrypted data back. So.
Right.
Again, what have you accomplished there? So
yeah, it's not like there's somebody manually typing in the password to decrypt the data every time the website wants to grab it for something. Yeah. It's an automatic trust relationship. So even if you had file level encryption and you had table level encryption going on with your database server, you could potentially say, hey, it restricts somebody who maybe popped the box and got root on the box from being able to grab those files and decrypt them easily. But again, you have to look at, exactly as you said, how is this encryption set up? What is it really meant to mitigate as a threat? So encryption for the sake of encryption doesn't stop everything. And so you have to think about the vector of the attack and what's coming in. And as he points out so eloquently, if you're an authorized user, or I should say if you are spoofing as an authorized user, or you have breached the credentials of an authorized user, that application knows no difference and will do exactly what it's programmed to do and decrypt the data as it hands it to you.
That's right.
So it's sort of, I'm not trying to pick on the press right now, but I'm going to. They have gotten in their head that encryption solves all problems. And so they're on this mantra of, oh, was it encrypted? How did they encrypt it? Why was it encrypted? And I think it's a more sophisticated conversation than that, or it's a more complicated conversation than that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that takes us into the third article about this, which comes from Krebs on Security, and the title of that one is "Talk Hackers Demand 80,000 pounds in Bitcoin." And this goes into, as you pointed out before the show, this article goes into a little more detail about what actually happened. And apparently, the alleged attackers have posted some of the data online, and it's a threat asking for a 80,000 pound ransom, so that they don't release the rest of the data. Which by the way, has its own. That's a whole other discussion, right? Whether you want to pay that ransom or not, because if you pay it, there's really no guarantee that they aren't going to release it anyway, nor is there actually any guarantee that they're the only ones that have it. So that's certainly a big problem. But apparently, as Krebs points out in here, the data that was stolen contains names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, email addresses, Talk account information, credit card details, and or bank details, which is really amazing. The thing that struck me, especially those last few things, credit card numbers and bank details, I wonder if there's a really good reason for that kind of data to be stored online, on the production internet-facing system, right? I understand that you generally are going to have that data somewhere in order to be able to process your transactions, but I'm not sure that that data probably doesn't need to be online and accessible. And so I suspect this is where the convenience of IT starts to creep in and intersect with security, because it's probably very convenient to have all of that data attached to one master record rather than trying to separate it out into different systems. But that's the opportunity here, right? If that data wasn't in the database, they couldn't have stole it.
Yeah, and deeper in the article, So TalkTalk said that's what was accessed. The guys who are posting sample data are saying it was more than that. Years at the current address, month at current address, home and mobile telephone number, employer, employment title, employment location, employer's phone number as well, and bank information, which is you're starting to get into some pretty seriously useful things there in terms of identity theft and whatnot. But anyway, back to your point. Yeah, I agree. And certainly, this is a convenience thing. If you're the data scientist or architect designing this out, sadly, and often these guys are not thinking about breaches when they're designing this. They're thinking about ease of use, convenience, scalability, efficiency. All those things.
Right.
And here's the other thing I thought really interesting. So this isn't verified yet, but Krebs is usually pretty damn accurate, so I trust it. But he's saying that according to his source, the intrusion started with a SQL injection, as we talked about, but was also coincident with a denial of service attack that sought to prevent legitimate users from visiting the targeted site, and may also have been there as a distraction for the IT and IT security teams, which we're seeing more and more. We're seeing DOS is used as a distraction technique or as a aid to a further breach of some variety.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that we've said this a couple times on the show as well. Hey, you may want to keep some folks in reserve to be watching everything else when your security team's off fighting a DOS.
Yeah, and in fact, it perk up your senses when and if you do fall victim to a denial of service attack, because that may be the cover, right? So that may be your trigger to go to go start looking for what other things might be happening.
So one other thing I thought was interesting, not getting too far off the rails here, but in the story they talk about how a vulnerability was reported in the video section of TalkTalk's website on a website called xssposed.org, exposed, basic cross-site scripting post, but pronounced exposed.org, a site that operates as a sort of public clearinghouse for information about unpatched website vulnerabilities. So I find that interesting, and I would say as an organization or as a blue team guy, you may want to be watching for your organization to pop up posted on Exposed.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think there are commercial services who will do that for you, by the way.
Yeah. And one other thing I'll say about Krebs, completely off topic, but on topic for Krebs, is he did a Reddit Ask Me Anything interview, I guess 2 days ago, Friday. That was pretty interesting, so it's worth taking a look at and reading through.
Yeah, it was. That was pretty good. I think this in this article, he tries to do some attribution of the potential attacker, right?
Well, North Korea, right?
No, actually.
No? I thought it was always North Korea.
It's somebody with the Twitter name, well, allegedly, at Fearful, who apparently resides in the UK. So, but there must be a Russian or Chinese or North Korean connection somehow. There's got to be, right?
Only nation states could do anything.
Totally.
Apparently.
Totally. All right, so moving on. Speaking of nation states, the next story comes from SecurityWeek.com, and the title is Hacking Impact Short-Lived, according to Sony Boss. So there was big news this past week that Sony apparently settled a series of lawsuits with its employees and is going to be providing or paying $10,000 to each employee whose personal detail or personal information was stolen, and also paying for data protection and other legal fees that employees might incur due to the breach. And basically the point here is that Sony's really heavily downplaying the aggregate impact to their business from this attack, which I find quite interesting and is becoming more of an interesting discussion point, because it's kind of been the the understanding or the expectation of many InfoSec people that a big breach like that is an existential event for an organization. And by the way, it's hard to imagine something worse than what happened to Sony, right?
Definitely.
They got owned every way possible, and here they are saying, well, it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, it's interesting. Part of me wants to say this is probably an accurate statement by Sony, and as difficult as it may be to say it, as somebody in the InfoSec industry, perhaps getting hacked is not the end of the world as we know it, as we all like to say it is. But then part of me says there could also be a PR angle here.
Well, I'm sure there is. I mean, it's pretty clear that they are. I mean, even going back to the event itself, when Kevin Mandia issued the now fateful email, right, about them not being able to prevent it. So I'm quite sure, as a media company, they have their own view of how to play this.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that we often say bad guys only have to be right once and the good guys have to be right every time, but honestly, maybe not. I don't know. There's a thought percolating in my head that I can't quite articulate here that this spawns. I may have to think about it a little bit, but
yeah,
I'm not saying our job isn't important. I'm not saying we shouldn't keep doing it, but as we are starting to see this new phase of massive breaches, it's interesting to watch the fallout of these and how sometimes, things go on, things continue.
Yeah. And that's not to say that there haven't been, that I don't know if it's possibly concentrated in the smaller organizations, because we've seen, for instance, DigiNotar, right? But to an extent, though, they went out of business. But I wonder how much of that was, because they were just they had their ball taken away and they couldn't play ball anymore. I mean, that was.
Well, I wonder too if it's the type of vertical. If you're
right.
a pure tech-based company, you're more likely to have an existential issue with a hack than a non-tech company.
Right. Well, there was the I forget the name of. They all run together. The cloud-based company who had all of their backups, and the source code company, right?
Oh, right.
They had all of their AWS images wiped out at the same time. Their backups, everything. They were they came in Monday morning and there was nothing left. So that they went out of business. But barring that, it seems like there aren't a lot of organizations actually going out of business as a result of this, and I do wonder how that plays into the investment perspective of InfoSec. So,
plus the cyber insurance aspect, which we keep talking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
If at the end of the day, at a executive level, at a 20,000-foot level, that this is a temporary issue that can be mitigated financially. Anyway,
no,
it's interesting.
You're right. So, moving on to our last story for tonight. I know this is near and dear to your heart. Comes from ThreatPost, and the title is European Aviation Agency Warns of Aircraft Hacking.
Oh my God.
Hackers on this plane. No, what's the right phrase? Get these motherfucking hackers off this motherfucking plane. Is that right?
I'm sick of all these motherfucking hackers on all these motherfucking planes, or something like that. I don't know. Do I look like Samuel Jackson to you?
We both screwed it up, didn't we?
We're old.
Anyway.
So first of all, I need to owe credit. Somebody pointed this to me on Twitter, a fan of the show, and I have failed to make a note of who pointed out to me, and I'm a terrible podcaster's result, and I apologize for that. But somebody pointed it out, and this got very little play. In fact, I didn't talk about it when it first pointed out because I only found one reference to this, and it didn't have a lot of information. I was like, I don't know if this is legit. And so it started to bubble up, and I'm starting to find some more about it. And it's interesting that this didn't get more play in the U.S., given everything that happened with Chris Roberts and all that stuff. But here's the long and short of it. So a paid pen test or paid security assessment was done by the European Aviation Safety Agency, which is kind of basically like our NTSB, if you will. And the guy they hired to do basically the pen test is also a commercial pilot, so he knew a lot about aviation and the aviation industry. And what he did was he exploited vulnerabilities in what's called the ACARS system, which stands for Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System. And this, in essence, is a basic text messaging system between planes and ground. And you might remember the ACARS system also came into play a lot for some of the recent aviation issues we had, like Malaysian Air 447, which we never found, and Air France that crashed in the Atlantic. So ACARS is really a system to send communication back and forth. And it's, in essence, almost like a text messaging system. And what he did was there's really no good validation and sort of you can spoof messages to ACARS very easily, is the bottom line. And that's what he found out he could do. He could easily, within a few minutes, they say, basically spoofed an ACARS message that the plane thought was legitimate and passed on to the crew as legitimate, which is a bit of a risk, especially when one of the biggest thing ACARS does is typically feed in approved flight plans. So when you're filing for a flight plan, and if you're an airliner with an ACARS system, you've actually got a dispatcher for the airline that has filed the flight plan and has gotten clearance for that flight plan, which is a series of waypoints that the in essence the aircraft is expected to follow unless told later by air traffic control, and often these are fed to you via the ACARS system, which is then fed into the basically the flight management system, which controls the automatic pilot. So the biggest risk, really, in my mind, is being able to confuse the crew with fake messages and perhaps feed them a fake, I guess for lack of a better term, flight plan. But the thing about the flight plan is they only get it at a very specific time as they're sitting on the ground, and it would probably be pretty evident to a crew that they're getting a fake flight plan. And it'd probably be pretty evident very quickly that the system had been compromised, you would think. But somebody could be very, very clever. It's kind of like phishing. If they're very, very, very clever, they could confuse a crew. But they can't control the aircraft through it. They can't take over the aircraft, and they can't do anything other than just send text messages that look like they're coming from the business or the company, or perhaps some aspect of air traffic control might be sending them an ACARS message, perhaps. This is a system that was designed in 1978. It had no security in mind. It had no authentication in mind, and it's being phased out over time. So it's interesting. And this, I think, is a much more realistic way to quote unquote do aircraft hacking, and it's something we talked about when a lot of the original Chris Roberts allegations came out.
So in this article down at the bottom, they talk about, I think they call it CSAR. So the specific sentence is, tomorrow, with the introduction of CSAR, I guess that's how you say it, and the possibility for air traffic control to directly give instructions to the aircraft control system, this risk will be multiplied. Is that what's the deal with that, man?
I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about CSAR. It is only in Europe right now. It's we are in the process of doing a massive upgrade on our sort of ATC and aviation control system in the U.S., but I don't know we've got something similar to CSAR. I need to do a little research on that. And I noticed this article just before we kind of went live today, so I will look into it and I will learn. But through context of the article, it sounds like a more advanced version of ACARS. So I don't know. We'll see. I need to find out more.
I'm all I can envision, by the way, is a ground control person in the bathroom with their iPad landing a commercial jet.
I think that was a Dilbert cartoon.
So there you go.
So here's the thing. One of the things that the airline industry and the aviation industry is trying to do is get away from everything being radio-based. Radio is actually a really crappy way to communicate. It's fraught with misunderstandings. It's you can't multiplex very well on the same frequency.
No, when you say radio, you mean voice, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah, voice radio, as in, airliner calls the tower or the center or approach or departure. Departure talks to them, over voice. A bunch of planes on the same frequency with call letters, and misunderstandings happen all the time. So there's this concept of if we can get to automated text-based and computer-based ATC commands going back and forth and requests, there'd be less misunderstandings. You could have much more asynchronous communication and synchronous communication as well. You could talk to many people at the same time. You weren't limited by a single congested frequency for a certain sector of the sky with a certain controller. You could do more complex and faster communication between the aircraft and the ground. So there is a move towards that, and I think that's what the CSAR system is, but do not quote me on that because I've done no research, but I know from just reading the trade papers and the articles in the U.S. that people want to move in that direction in the U.S. as well. The challenge is with airliners and these sorts of things is you really have to move as a world because of the international nature of aviation.
Right.
So I'm not intimately familiar with CSAR, but I think it is something only in Europe right now. But I hate to say it, I don't know. I need to look into it. Anyway, point being, we want to get away from using radio voice comms if we can.
No, it makes sense.
At least for a lot of the routine stuff.
That was what the movie Airplane taught me, by the way. Stryker.
Hardly even know. I thought it taught us it was the wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Well, there's that too.
And that you like gladiator movies.
Well, hey.
Spent some time in a Turkish prison.
What can I say? All right.
Anyway, I just wanted to point out an article about substantial, real aviation-related threat as opposed to some of the FUD and fear-mongering and craziness that sometimes gets reported.
No, it was good. It was interesting that they that one of these organizations actually commissioned a pen test, right, from a pilot who apparently is also a hacker. So there you go. So that was our last story. Thank you very much again for listening to the show. Thank you very much to those people who have donated to our Patreon campaign. Cannot thank you enough for that. That is very, very helpful to us. Also, thank you to those people who have left us such kind reviews on iTunes. I'm always amazed at what people say. We talked last week about the SQL injection one, which, it's still funny.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And you can, if you want to find links to the stories that we talked about today, you can find them on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter at DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lerg, that's L-E-R-G. And if you are not already following him, you should. And you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink, just like it sounds. And with that, anything else?
No, we're good. Have a great week, everybody. Thanks for listening, and look forward to talking to you next week.
Take care. Bye-bye. TLS is just turning into the biggest nightmare for IT shops.
I agree.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.